What you're about to hear is part one of a multi-part series on no holds barred fighting in America. I'm your host, Patrick Euclid.
Welcome to the Cage of History, Episode 1, ReBirth of NHB.
What if you took different styles of fighting? You know, each one represented by a different fighter, and threw them all in the Kumite together. Ostensibly to find out, what would be the fighting discipline of the last man standing? What's the best style of martial arts? That ridiculous question, of course, had already been answered back in the 70s. From the so-called lost interview, from one of the most innovative martial artists in the last 100 years, here's Bruce Lee. Quote, I do not believe in styles anymore. I do not believe that there is such thing as like Chinese way of fighting or the Japanese way of fighting or whatever way of fighting, because unless human beings have 3 arms and 4 legs, then we will have a different form of fighting. But basically we have only 2 hands and 2 feet. So styles tends to not only separate man because of their own doctrines, and then the doctrines became the gospel truth, that you cannot change, But if you do not have styles, if you just say, well, here I am as a human being, how can I express myself? Totally and completely. Now, that way you won't create a style, because style is a crystallization, That way it's a process of continuing growth. Close quote. In the times that we're talking about in this case, it's the early 90s. It was ripe for this kind of ridiculous question. What's the best style? Heavyweight boxing was huge. The Ted Turner brand of wrestling just began to emerge. This is the time of American Gladiators and Street Fighter II for the Super Nintendo. And that is how the whole thing came off. 8 cartoon characters face off in a battle royale with cheese. And E. Honda quickly gets his teeth kicked out in the first matchup. And I don't mean any disrespect by that. I do know that man's name, unlike the principal play-by-play announcer for this debacle. A legendary figure in martial arts at this time, Superfoot Bill Wallace, and a legendarily bad figure in the realm of fight commentary. Bill Wallace says this man's name at least a dozen times, and I don't think he gets it right once. The big sumo's name is Teyla To Lee, and in the first few seconds of actual action, he comes charging across the cage at a man literally half his size. And at this point, I should mention that there are no weight classes, and it's contested in a cage, not for the participants' protection, but for cosmetic, aesthetic reasons, and there'll be more on that later. Teyla To Lee's teeth tumble through the chain link and the tone is set. The awaiting participants had been relaxed in the locker room, and suddenly a powerful tension had awakened. In the words of one competitor, Ken Shamrock, quote, because it was Gerard Gordo and a sumo. And there's such a size difference, and everybody in the locker room, we had monitors, and everybody in the locker room were popping pads and we're warming up, and it's that machismo in there is just getting going. And we were looking, and we all of a sudden we watched and saw that, right? And he just stepped up and football kicked him right in the face. Just no style, no nothing, just bang, teeth go flying in the front row. And the audience went silent. It felt like a second, but it was a split second. They just and then everybody popped. And in the locker room, it was the same thing. Guys were in there, and they were all trying to act tough, kill them and this and that. And their entourage were all, jumping around, and the minute that happened, it went quiet. We just see that, right? He just kicked him in the face. Can you do that? No holds barred, right? This is not pro wrestling. This is real. Close quote. The first victor in the opening round is a man named Gerard Gordo. And I believe he was Belgian. And when introduced, he gives us the Roman salute, which we Americans perceive as being so very German. And his style is a French folk kickboxing art called savate. He wins this fight against the much bigger man by utilizing the basics. Composure. Footwork. Kicking the other guy in the face if he falls down. And I should mention, as far as his composure is concerned, he is one of the calmest competitors on the roster. And I might also describe him as a heel in kayfabe terms. You know, he is the dirtiest player in the game. Dirtier than Andrew Galata. Dirtier than Gilbert Ivel. Dirtier than Dirty Bob Schreiber. And not to put too fine a point on it, but Gerard Gordo is such a cartoon heel character that his fouling created yet another cartoon character. A Japanese gentleman by the name of Yuki Nakai would become the eye patch guy because Gordo permanently blinded him with his thumb in the opening round of another mixed rules tournament a few years later. I say mixed rules, and that is not exactly a fair characterization. This was billed as no rules. No holds barred, we call it. Well, there were rules. You could not wear a claw or a mask, like the Matador, but basically Street Fighter 2 with maybe a couple of exceptions. You could not gouge another man's eye, for instance. Pretty universally decried as a bitch move. Biting, sorry, Mike Tyson, also not permitted. And it's been debated as to whether fish hooking would be tolerated officially, but really anything was debatable because the referee was about as inept as the commentary staff. He did next to nothing, and I'll go over that a little more. But what's surprising about it is that this man, we're led to believe, is a veteran referee with a lot of experience officiating matches in Brazil of this kind. Vale Tudo, they're called there. Anything goes. And he'd had a lot of experience with Vale Tudo because this kind of thing was nothing new down by the rainforest. There was a whole dynasty that had already been established by a man who proliferated a certain style across the whole globe by now being the time you're listening to this, and proliferated it in a singular way to the point that every practitioner of his Brazilian style of jiu-jitsu can trace their instruction back to him. You know, your instructor was instructed by a guy whose instructor was this guy, or one of his sons, or one of their sons, or one of their cousins. This man is named Teyla Gracie, and he is present at this tournament, this battle royale with cheese. I sort of unconsciously believed that it needed no introduction, but just so that we are clear, the tournament is something called the Ultimate Fighting Championship. Unless you're the announcer, who continually called it the Ultimate Fighting Challenge. Now, as I mentioned, Teyla Gracie is there, but he's not a participant in this tournament. He's an old man, an octogenarian, and that's what they call him, the old man. He's already had his day back in Brazil. And he is there to support another member of the dynasty, his youngest son, a man named Hoist Gracie, who is announced as Royce Gracie. And he is accompanied to the cage by nearly the entire family, in a bizarre, bouncing conga line of killers, each with his hands on the next one's shoulders. Hoist's opponent, Art Jimmerson, enters the cage equipped with one boxing glove, presumably to half represent the sweet science. The image is shameful, and the performance equally so. This man is the first to do something we call submission, with no apparent reason. And in Art Jimmerson's own words, quote, "You know it again, it was like a fish out of water. I mean, I had to stay up on top. To be a boxer, I had to stay on my feet. And once he took my legs up under me, I looked up at the referee like, all right, I'm ready to get up. And he's like, no, keep fighting. And then Hoist headbutts me 3 times. I said, he's cheating. He says, no. And then I feel a heel kick in the side of my waist. I'm like, referee, then I feel my legs all, so it was a really bad night for me. Close quote. Art Jimmerson has alleged that he wore this single glove to protect his jab hand because he had a title fight booked against Thomas the Hitman Hearns not long after this event. Now, Hearns is an absolute legend. We've all seen his bout with Marvelous Marvin Hagler, and considering Jimmerson's reaction to a few noogies, It's probably best for him that he never got a contract to face the hitman. He may have been murdered. Needless to say, Gracie Jimmerson was no Hagler Hearns, and none of these fights were particularly competitive or action-packed, due in part to the fact that the venue was held in the Rocky Mountains a mile above sea level in the great state of Colorado. Legalized it? But in all honesty, I watched these early events on VHS as a kid, and I had to fast forward during Hoist's ground action to force through the boredom. I'd been accustomed to Tyson, and now I was watching something that looked akin to stop-motion photography. It was like a glacier in a gi. Each positional advance was an ice age. The other factor was that few of the participants were experienced with grappling or submission holds of any kind. It was common opinion then amongst strikers that the joint lock shit was just that. Shit. Bullshido, we call it. Bullshit martial arts. Especially in regard to the leg locks. Very few people really thought that, figure 4 pro wrestling bullshit would ever work. And that figure 4 pro wrestling bullshit was the bread and butter of Hoist's next opponent in the semifinal round, Ken Shamrock. Now, Shamrock won his place against Hoist by defeating a native Colorado kickboxer who had just won a prestigious full-contact karate tournament called the Slovakia Challenge or something like that. And guess what? Ken wins with an Achilles hold. A leg lock. Now, the Achilles hold is not a particularly sexy leg lock. It's not like a calf crank or a knee bar or any other technique where the audience can easily see how the leverage is being applied. With those kinds of holds, even with only a cursory understanding of body mechanics, you can tell a guy's leg is being torn apart. But unless you're specifically familiar with the Achilles hold, you'd probably have no idea why Shamrock's opponent suddenly stops flailing kicks at his head and begins to cry out in pain, signaling submission with both hands in a panic. This man could not believe and did not understand that he could be crippled by this kind of technique. Much like the 99% of the viewing audience, which contained its own cartoon characters, such as a shirtless man with the words "Just Bleed" painted colorfully on his forehead. He was slightly bewildered and upset that the fight had ended this way. Even as he was being escorted from the cage by his cornermen, hobbling between them helplessly, he bellowed belligerence back at Shamrock, who yelled back in the middle of his post-fight interview, keeping it classy. So it is no surprise that the commentators cast him in the role of villain when he comes back to face Royce Gracie. Ken is, at this stage of his life, shredded by any standard. He looks as though a typical gentleman were halfway through a transformation into the Hulk. The sideways half. 6 feet tall and 3 feet wide, his rippling contours contained only by a red Speedo. He storms to the cage like a man whose 16-year-old son has just called to say, "I'm sorry, Dad, but erect a vet." Hoist, by contrast, is unassuming. He's narrow-faced, narrow-shouldered, not particularly muscular, not particularly menacing. He doesn't look furious, just focused. He doesn't challenge with his eyes. In fact, he keeps them mostly downcast. He looks like your average dork in a gi. The karate pajamas. He looks like he could be teaching a kids' class at the YMCA. And he returns to the cage with the rest of the Gracie family. It's difficult to single him out of the train. He's just an average Joe. And as they face off in the center of the cage, Bill Wallace and the crack team of commentators opine that Ken is going to have some choice words for Hoist, but Hoist himself, he'll be a gentleman. Well, they're both gentlemen. They're both what you might call professionals. And as they're facing off, I can't think of an earthly idea of why they're facing off. I mean, there are no instructions, I imagine, that this ESL referee from Brazil is going to give them, This is supposed to be a no-rules match. What is he going to say? "Okay, everybody listen up, pay attention. I'm going to fight you. We're going to fight you clean. You both take a shower, okay? All you can do in the fight, what you can do. What, you got Hadouken? Sonic Boom? Yoga Fire? You got Electric Eel Attack? Flying Head Stomp? Twisted Torpedo? With no particular commands to obey, no gloves to touch, and no corners to return to. as the cage area is a ring with the corners cleanly cut off into an octagon. In fact, it is called the Octagon trademark, not to be confused with the Chuck Norris film of the same name. The competitors back up to opposite sides of the Octagon trademark, and when the fight begins, it's Hoist that charges.
Gracie, Shamrock, and the action begins.
He shoots on Shamrock's leg low from the outside,
who tries to turn him
well out of striking range, and his result is sprawled on easily.
The back door. Clinched against the fence.
Shamrock tries to turn him with underhooks to expose Hoist's back to the canvas, and a scramble ensues.
The kidneys of Shamrock.
Before Gracie can pull him in and settle into his guard,
Shamrock's postured up.
Shamrock rolls back for a leg lock.
The horse reverses.
He just pulled this exact setup in his previous fight.
Shamrock still attacking.
And Hoist defends it perfectly.
Hoist a few palm strikes.
As Ken rolls back, he uses the momentum to rock forward, putting weight and pressure down to prevent the crushing vice of Shamrock's Hulk arms from threatening his ankle. Now amazingly, Hoist Gracie is now on top, in dominant position against the bigger man. But before he can attack, they're scrambling again. And again, Ken is going for a leg. But this time, he's made a terrible error. He has exposed his back to a jiu-jitsu black belt.
There's some confusion.
What happens next happens so fast that the commentators are baffled by it, the crowd befuddled by it, and the referee blind to
Gracie the
it.
victor by submission.
As it turns out, it's Hoist that has the choice words for Ken, and we can't hear what he's saying, but I imagine with something like, "Filio de puta, you tap. Son of the bitch, you wanna go again? Go! Go!" And this useless referee, whom I would assume has the best view in the house, as he is literally feet away from the action, has to stop and ask Ken Shamrock if he really tapped out, if he should really stop this fight, or if he should let it continue. As he explains in his post-fight interview, breathless in the thin Denver air.
I was trying to work. I was thinking too much about getting a leg, not enough about worrying about my neck.
It looked like you did have supremacy early on, and then suddenly it reversed like lightning.
See, that's the way submission is.
Have you ever fought someone jiu-jitsu before?
No, first time.
He picked his head up, and he was screaming to the referee something. What was he saying?
I tapped the mat, and the referee didn't see it. So he said, referee's gonna let it go. But I tapped the mat, I'm not gonna lie. Otherwise, the referee would have let it go. And he let go of his hold already. So it wouldn't have been fair for me to say keep going.
Yeah. John Milius is over there, big-time movie producer, thinks you got amazing potential. It'll be a lot safer.
I like fighting.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Now we're going to go back to the booth where the big guys are, all the champions.
Now let's go see what's the rematch of the thing, the replay, to see exactly what Hoist did with Ken.
Thank you, Bill. The replay of the thing to see exactly what Hoist did with Ken reveals 5 unmistakable taps directly in the ref's line of sight. A further examination of the choke reveals that Hoist completed it by gripping his own gi sleeve. So the pajamas are not just for looks. And a word or two on the pajamas while we're here. And I'll have to be careful on the first part and say in advance that I mean no disrespect. This is history I'm talking about. But the belt is kind of bullshit. The traditional chromatic system of progression, white, yellow, orange, green, blue, purple, brown, black, and whatever subtle variations, that's only served our modern era of martial arts in the last 100 years or so with rigidity. Crystallization, as Bruce Lee said earlier. And by earlier, I mean before I was born. The International Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Federation, the IBJJF, doesn't recognize yellow, orange, and green belts, but it did introduce the purple, brown, and black ones. Alio himself previously used only white and blue, like Jigoro Kano style, designating the experienced from the novice. But after the formation of the Federation, he came up with the red belt, and the BJJ community came up with the saying, there are black belts, and then there are black belts. Hoist, for instance, is a black belt. His brother Hickson, for instance, is a black belt. Now, as I said, this confusion with colored belts has been with us only in the modern era because While there had been gis for hundreds of years, belts came into vogue as a way to signify a practitioner's rank in judo, which is a modern martial art, a more rigid and ideological offshoot of traditional Japanese jiu-jitsu. Now, jiu-jitsu had been around since the samurai, so had the gi. Along with swordsmanship and horsemanship and archery, jiu-jitsu was one of about a dozen martial arts that the samurai practiced. And the gi is something that the samurai wore under their armor. As a Japanese warrior, it was what you wanted to die in. It was funeral garb. Allegedly. And of course the gi comes in handy to strangle people with, and it also provides proper friction to protect against competitors who grease themselves to get around the grappler's grip. But the point is, it's funeral garb. To the samurai, wearing the gi means that you are ready to die. And that is how Hoist goes into the final round against his last opponent, Gerard Gordo. Now, Gordo got through the semi-final fight against another striker by sheer relentlessness. He's a bit banged up, his hand is broken, but he remains game. Hoist hasn't taken a single punch. He's unscathed, and the only stress he's felt has been the expectation of victory. And the pressure cannot be overstated in his case. Decades of dedication, like 6 decades, have led up to this moment. The Brazilian dynasty is on the precipice of a pop culture breakthrough, and it's all up to one man. And this family has already had students in the United States, but it was basically a Southern California secret, save for snippets of the style that had already eked into Hollywood. John Milius, just mentioned, was a student, and the Gracies had already been involved with some stunt coordination on certain sets. You may recall a scene in Lethal Weapon where Mel Gibson gets out-psychopathed by Gary Busey, which in retrospect was the OG WrestleMania of Rageaholics. And Busey, who is too crazy to be KO'd after catching continuous crushing concussive cracks to the cranium, with like a length of rebar, or my memory of the movie is fuzzy. But when Riggs wraps his legs around the man's neck, we all collectively caught our first glimpse of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. We just didn't know it. But the purchasers of this pay-per-view event probably heard it in their sleep that night. Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. Maybe in the first myoclonic jerks beforehand, their arms would shoot up to protect their necks. Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. It had thus far been akin to an infomercial, complete with an award ceremony for the old man, honoring him as the first Ultimate Fighter. And now it was time for the final stress test. The proof of the product to put in the pockets of the consumer.
Alright, here we go. It's Gracie in the gi versus Gordo in the pants.
Dirty Gerard Gordo tentatively takes the center of the cage, and it's quite clear based on his body posture that he wants to avoid overcommitting. His stance suggests a strategy of landing a clean kick, maybe using footwork and punches to set up.
Gordo's stalking
But for having fought into the final round, he looks fairly fresh, not stepping too tenderly with the metatarsals that still allegedly contain 2 of Teyla To Lee's teeth, and though he did injure his hand boxing bigger men in the bouts before, he appears prepared to throw power punches.
Closes the distance.
Hoist ruins all of this, though.
A body lock.
He catches the clinch by coming in with a kick, instead of shooting low like on Shamrock. And this prevents Gordo from utilizing an opportunity to counter with a kick of his own. Instead, his defenses follow Gracie's foot, which falls ineffectively to the floor. It's just a feint, designed to distract as Hoist closes the distance. Now Gracie's got a grip on Gordo, and he tries to trip his leg out as he forces him to the fence.
Gracie pushes in.
And from here, it's all quicksand.
Pummels Gordo against the fence.
Any of Gordo's decisions only drag him deeper into danger.
Looking to pass, he's in mount. He's mounted Gordo.
As soon as the fight hits the mat, Hoist hits the mount, and Dirty Gerard bites his ear. Now this is like a love bite.
Crossface now, trying to get some separation.
A little nibble in comparison to the shark attack that befell Evander Holyfield.
Gracie working to the side. He's given up the mount for some reason.
But biting a prize fighter produces a pretty universal reaction. they tend to become
Gracie, the
fucking
master
irate.
submission artist.
Royce has had enough of this fool.
Going for the neck
He
of
pries
Gordo.
apart their faces and
Headbutts
baits
to the back
Gordo
of the
into an
head.
escape that reveals his back, which he takes without effort. The metaphorical
He's getting in there
quicksand
deep now,
naturally
working the
filling
arm
the empty
under the
space.
chin.
And it's just a matter
He's
of
got a
time
grip of
before
his
he
gi.
drowns in the deep end of Shit's
And
Creek
that's it, Gordo is
without
tapping.
a paddle to speak of.
Gordo is tapping
Royce held
repeatedly.
the choke a little longer than
And the
necessary.
winner is Gracie by
And
submission.
to be honest, he could have held it as long
It's
as he
no
liked.
doubt.
The ineffectual
Gracie
referee
defeated the
looking
Methodist.
on, a hand on both men's shoulders as if
What's this?
consoling them, reassuring them that
Royce.
it would be okay if they decided to stop
Gracie's saying
fighting.
something now. Is he indicating here? He's having some words. He's having some words with Gordo.
And of course we can't hear what Hoist is saying, but I like to imagine it went something like, "Filho de puta, why you bit me? You cannibal savage. Get some manners." The ref raises his hand, but Hoist isn't happy. And this ref, I feel like I have given this guy so much shit that I might have inadvertently damaged the reputation of another entirely innocent individual. I was sort of trying to streamline this story, truncate the tale into something digestible. Yeah. And there's a lot to unpack here, and I'm only attempting to omit the irrelevant, but in full disclosure, there were actually 2 referees that night, and they alternated between bouts. And one of them, a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt named João Barreto, did a perfectly decent job and faded into the background like any referee should. And the other, of course, has earned my ire in such a way that I won't even mention his name, may he fade into obscurity. And while I'm here in full disclosure mode, I feel that another ancillary explanation is necessary regarding the rules and referee instructions which I was joking about earlier. So the 2 rules we know for sure: don't bite a man, don't gouge his eye. They were not actually enforced by the referee, strictly speaking. Those infractions were enforced only by a $1,500 fine. I don't even know if anybody even paid it. To the best of my knowledge, it's just the 2 finalists that even know the bite had happened at this point. And after a few of his brothers have rushed the Octagon trademark, hoisting Hoist upon their shoulders and proudly displaying him to the world like a living trophy, I'm not even sure that anyone there would have cared. The tournament prize was $50,000. I'm not even sure Hoist cared about that. When asked what he'll do with the money, he jokingly responds, like a big kid,
What are you going to do with the money? I'm going to go to Disneyland. You going to Disneyland?
The youngest of his brothers. At this point in his life, he doesn't even have a bank account. The only thing that matters to him is the honor of his family, the pride of his father, the tradition of his heritage. And that's good, because while there is a landmark victory for the Gracies here, it was not a one-time event. Hoist's eldest brother, Horion, and his business partner, Art Davey, had negotiated a 5-year development deal for this franchise with a company called Semaphore Entertainment Group, and they were just getting started. They had sold Hoist's winning effort in 86,000 homes, sight unseen. Well, of course, sight unseen. There had never really been anything like this, except that there had, the results of which were, by comparison, catastrophic. And if you want to go down that rabbit hole, I feel that starting with Muhammad Ali versus Antonio Inoki should be enough of a deterrent that you won't be angry with me for wasting valuable moments of your life, which are, as I imagine that event to have been, non-refundable. And whoever the maniacs were that had bought this on pay-per-view, martial artists themselves, or maybe just people bored with the WWF, they had just seen a skinny Brazilian beat out a bunch of bigger, tougher, more stereotypical badasses. And they were going to Cliff Clavin all of their buddies about how, oh, yeah, you got your Gracie Jiu-Jitsu? Yeah, I shut down a nuclear weapon. I seen it on the pay-per-view there. And seeing was believing. Before they had sold Semaphore Entertainment on this tournament, Horion Gracie and his business partner Art Davey had been turned down by every television outlet they could pitch for 6 consecutive months. HBO had held no interest. Showtime had shown them no time. and Semaphore had been one of the first developers for pay-per-view content, selling concerts and comedy shows, which were laden with problems, as you can imagine, just coming out of the 80s. For a lot of these entertainers, showing up to work is drug-seeking behavior. So there were a lot of one-shot one-offs, and it was up to a man there at SEG named Campbell McLaren to fetch them new talent. Now, I almost universally loathe every businessman in the industry. I don't know. Except for the tentpole bullshit. Scott Coker seems alright. I've never had the pleasure. But I kind of, sort of, like Campbell McLaren. Not to say that he's a good guy, but he's at least got a genuine sense of humor. And when he met Art Davie, a New York ad man, who'd happened to stumble onto the Gracies, allegedly from an article in Playboy magazine of all places, and he pitched Horian an idea he'd called the War of the Worlds. You know, fucking Street Fighter 2. Now, the Gracies already had something like this in place. A standing challenge to any other type of stylist. To show up on their doorstep with $100,000 cash and make an even odds bet on yourself against whoever the best Gracie in the house happened to be at that exact moment. A little unrealistic, but there were a few takers. Though I don't know what the stakes ended up being. Maybe just bragging rights. For the Gracies, I mean. You would be, at the very least, videotaped so they could laugh at you during the family barbecue, but possibly also distributed in a series package called Gracie in Action. And it was that series that Art Davie showed Campbell McLaren and convinced him to take a chance on the idea. Like I said, seeing is believing. But it took a lot more than that just to get Art in the door. He'd formed an LLC, WoW Promotions, or WOW War of the Worlds Promotions. He drafted a business plan and convinced about 30 people, most of whom were Horian students, to invest in the project, and raised $250,000. And they had John Milius on board, and John Milius was big Hollywood. Screenplays, you know. He directed Conan, which is almost certainly why the fighters were contained in an octagon, and in Horian's own words, from an interview with Jordan Breen, quote, "I specifically did not want a boxing-like ring, because based on my experience I've seen people get in a fight, and then if they start getting beat up, they slip between the ropes and get away. So to prevent that kind of thing, we needed something that would stop the guys from getting out. And we thought of a moat with alligators around, you know, or sharks. We thought of all kinds of an electric fence. But eventually we settled for the octagon the way it is. Not with a corner, you know, but with 8 sides. So the guy would not get caught in the corner, stuck in a bad position accidentally because of that kind of stuff. So we just came up with all kinds of different ideas and eventually settled for this one." End of quote. By a guy, he means Hoist, specifically. The Gracie in Action challenge matches had been fought on the open mat, typically. You know, where grappling belongs, and where the most options are accessible. And the Octagon, trademark, was enormous. It was something like 32 feet in length, so big that the production team had a hard time shooting around it. But Campbell McLaren was learning quickly. And the first time around, with a minimum amount of lead time, they'd created a phenomenon. The bloodiest, most ruthless and barbaric brand of fight sports since Bloodsport. And, you know, this was real. It was, in McLaren's eyes, instead of Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat. I'm sure he wanted to see some fatality-like finishes with gallons of blood gushing from the fighters' faces. At least in theory. As they would soon learn, serious injury was the last thing that they wanted. But for now, the bloodlust was at an unbelievable level of lasciviousness. For the first event, there'd been trouble acquiring quality competition, and now they had so many applicants who wanted to prove themselves against and dethrone Hoist Gracie, they had a difficult time sifting through them all. and one of the original Gracie challenge takers, a 5-animal kung fu stylist named Jason DeLucia, had faced Hoist and lost, and he was obsessed with getting his revenge. He had been an alternate in the first UFC, winning his alternate bout, by the way, and now it was his chance to fight his way into the tournament. You see, this time there were so many entrants, they'd made it a 16-man tournament, and if you got into the quarterfinals, you got onto the pay-per-view proper. With one sole exception, a Japanese heavyweight karate champ, who brought with him a contingent of Japanese media, who gasped in that adorably Japanese way when his opening round matchup was announced against Hoist Gracie. The karate champ's name was Minoki Ichihara, and he was roughly as famous in Japan as Chuck Norris in the US. Before Walker, Texas Ranger, I mean. And Ichihara's style combined karate and judo, and his plan was to defend the throw and blast Hoist in the clinch with punches. From the footage I've seen, he wasn't bad at the variety of throws and counters he practiced. He was, after all, heavyweight champion. But in the land of the rising sun, heavyweight doesn't mean the same thing that we're used to out in the West. For the first time in 4 fights, Hoist's opponent would be the smaller man. And not just lighter, but smaller in every way. Shorter, and with a reach disadvantage. When they faced off, it was very apparent. And to my eye, at least, it did not look good. I wanted to root for the little Japanese guy. And that was the reason why Hoist had been chosen to represent the family style. Because he didn't look like a badass. Any one of the Gracies in that conga line of killers, by all accounts, were probably superior fighters. Hoist himself actually stated on record that he didn't care about having to fight anyone. He was just relieved it wasn't going to be his brother Hickson, who had been his trainer for these 2 tournaments. In the second tournament, although extreme elevation was still an issue as they hadn't moved the venue from Denver, they had at least gotten rid of super foot-in-the-mouth Bill Wallace, replaced by Ben Perry, who was nearly as obnoxious, but had at least some cursory familiarity with the Gracie family art. The referee this time around, who would become an iconic figure in the world that would become mixed martial arts, also Gracie trained, had asked Horian for permission to enter the tournament, and of course had been denied. This was the Gracie show. But Horian had been so incensed about Joao Barreto stopping the very first fight, the one where Teyla To Lee's teeth go tumbling through the chain link fence, that he wanted a referee he could, trust. Big John McCarthy, a California cop and enormous individual, towered over both Hoist and Ichihara, who seemed to be trying to out-humble each other in the stare-down, and went over the conditions for victory, which could come at no less than knockout, submission, or the corner throwing in the towel. And as the match begins, so continues an epic feud between the Gracie family and the Japanese, dating back to the old man Elio's first significant loss to Count Kimura. And I'll spare you the play-by-play and cut to the chase because it's just not worth it. The first strike Ichihara initiates is an inside low kick, immediately putting himself slightly off balance, and Hoist quickly clinches and collapses the smaller man to the mat. He gets the mount easily, and Ichihara holds his head down for the better part of 5 minutes, while he gets knuckled in the ribs, and we are left to the mercy of the commentary team, which also contained the talents of Pro Football Hall of Famer Jim Brown, and a voice you may have recognized earlier, from Fox and Friends, Brian Kilmeade, so young. Anyway, how can I explain this? My memory, my explicit memory, is different from history. You see, I remember Hoist winning this fight by armbar. I remember Ben Perry going on ad nauseum about the damage to Ichihara's arm, the ruptured capsule in his elbow, whatever that means, as he writhed in pain, holding his arm for a disquieting amount of time. But the record shows that Gracie won this fight by lapel choke, although that is not my recollection, not at all. Neither was Ken Shamrock's victory over the native Colorado kickboxer Pat Smith by an Achilles hold, according to history. and even Pat Smith himself admits it was a heel hook. Though as I reviewed the footage, I could clearly see that he was correct. I explicitly remember Shamrock winning that fight by Achilles hold, because that was my go-to footlock. And I hadn't seen anyone else attempt that hold in these early events. I mean, maybe Oleg Toktarov. But, I tried my best to understand, to delve into the mysteries of that submission. Because it wasn't like anything I'd been used to. It wasn't a joint lock per se. It was a crushing, slicing hold. And it had me confused. How did it work? Was it the forcing down of the metatarsals that hyperextended the ankle? I tested it out on people. Hey, does this hurt? Where does it hurt? How about now? What if I adjust it like this? In any case, much like the narrator of Great Expectations, I will never lie to you. But I can't profess to tell you history as it actually occurred, only as I remember it. And as I remember it, Hoist finishes this Japanese karate champion by armbar. But we are told by Ben Perry that, for some reason, some honor-related reason, he really wanted to win by choke. Now, Jason DeLucia, the kung fu hero who wanted revenge, faced off with another kung fu fighter in his opening bout. We're told that the fight went over 6 minutes, which was quite long in this climate, and was a display of art and strategy. 300,000 people purchased this pay-per-view, and God only knows how many watched on a black box, and none of them got to see this fight. I'm told that all of the preliminary bouts were included on the VHS release, but I don't remember that. I remember watching the tape until it was worn out, each time fast-forwarding through Hoist's opening match, just pining for 6 minutes of monkey paw, eagle claw, crane kick, kung fu shit instead. But that stereotypical style did not at all reflect the action I've seen of Jason DeLucia. His first fight with Hoist appeared on the second Gracie in Action tape, and is possibly the single most viewed of all the Gracie Challenge matches, almost certainly viewed by Campbell McLaren during Art Davies' pitch, and it ended with Jason submitting after being punched in the face repeatedly, in a mounted triangle, probably with no earthly idea of how he wound up in such a terrible position. In the first fight, Jason stood perpendicular to Hoist and tried to kick from the outside, but this just ended up giving Gracie a good angle to approach DeLucia's exposed back and get the clinch unopposed. In the second fight, he abandoned that strategy entirely.
DeLucia. Here we go, and immediately they clinch.
Electing instead to charge into the
DeLucia
clinch.
takes him down. A little turning hip toss.
Throw Hoist to the mat and attempt to hold him down and punch.
Here. And DeLucia's attempting to hold him down by the gi.
But with only a tentative grasp on grappling
Gracie
essentials, this is a Herculean effort.
Gracie's gonna sneak out the back door. Oh, he swept him.
And it's
he swept him
catastrophe
all
before
over.
he can even land a clean
He's got
blow.
them out.
Hoist reverses the pin,
DeLucia attempts
and
to
now with
escape.
DeLucia on his back,
The mount is tight.
trapped beneath the Brazilian black belt.
Settled in now. He's got his leg postured
He
up,
tries to stand and nothing, tries to turn, nothing there either.
creating a little space and tempting DeLucia to escape to his
Then,
right.
calmly, Hoist sets up the armbar, which DeLucia attempts to
Oh, he's
escape
setting
from
up
by
the arm lock
standing,
now.
but he's dragged back down again.
Oh, he's got it. He's
Hoist
got
with
it.
his arm in a death
DeLucia's
grip,
tapping.
leaving
DeLucia's
the
arm
would-be
is
Avenger
injured.
tapping desperately,
Well, Hoist really cranked on that thing.
probably with no earthly idea of how he wound up in such a terrible position
And they
yet
embrace
again.
in the presence of the referee, Big John McCarthy, who raises the hand of the champion, Mr. Royce Gracie himself.
Up next on the chopping block in the rise of Hoist was a Dutch gi grappler by the name of Remco Pardy. He had some European judo and jiu-jitsu accolades to his name, and he was upwards of 250 pounds, so I thought this guy would dominate. But he just didn't have the proper mentality. His televised fight in the quarterfinals was against another Dutchman, an explosive, if undersized, Muay Thai kickboxer, whom we are led to believe beat the absolute dog shit out of his opening round competition. And while Remco easily clinched him, tossed him down, pinned him in the scarf hold, and then proceeded to elbow his head into the mat until he separated him from his consciousness, seriously, the thudding was palpable. He did not seem to be too impressed by his own performance. In his post-fight interview afterward, he tells us that he didn't expect to beat such a tough guy. And when the interviewer is surprised but impressed that such a mental strategy was paying off so well, Remco looks at him as if to say, "That's just who I am, bro." Also, totally unverified, but he's rumored to have gotten deep into the European rave scene in a respectable way, so maybe he's just more of a lover than a fighter.
Alright, here we go. Remco Pardy versus Hoist
Remco
Gracie.
comes out plotting,
Both
wanted to get a
standing
grip
very
on
upright,
Gracie's gi.
tentative. Pardy takes the center of the octagon.
But with Hoist sticking to the outside, he's uncertain of how to initiate. The drastic difference in size and speed enables Hoist to close the gap and take Pardy's back.
Hoist closes the distance with a stomp and takes the underhooks in his back. He's got the back clinch now. Pardy is attempting a throw, but Hoist is in blocking position.
Dragging him down to the canvas in advantageous
He's using the back
position.
drag now. He's reaped the leg and he's taken Pardy to the mat. Remco's got his body low, attempting to protect the neck, but
Gracie grabs the gi collar immediately
Gracie
and begins
is going.
applying a choke,
He's grabbed the
but it's
lapel.
caught on the judoka's chin.
One of his arms is trapped, but he just needs one hand to finish this choke here. Oh, good grief.
And he looks really unhappy about it.
It's stuck now on the chin of Remco Pardy.
I can't tell what the hell Hoist thinks is going on,
The pressure on his chin must be tightening.
but he keeps cranking, teeth gritted, lips curled back.
Hoist Gracie is attempting to finish this choke with everything he's
And
got.
for the first time,
His
he
teeth
looks
are
really
clicking
vicious.
tough. He's tapping. Pardy is tapping. And the face on Gracie was just a Richter snarl.
In the tournament final, Hoist would face the native Colorado kickboxer, who lost in the first round of the first Ultimate Fighting Championship, Pat Smith. And Pat Smith looked vicious right out the gate. In the first 4 months since the first UFC event, Smith had been training obsessively in grappling. He worked on his takedown defense and escaping the clinch, getting up from the bottom. Solid wrestlers who would consistently shoot in on opponents' legs hadn't yet entered the scene, but Pat Smith was otherwise essentially the first to try a sprawl and brawl approach to training. He had also cultivated a submission hold of his own, choking his opening round opponent with a front chin lock, or a guillotine choke as it would come to be most popularly called in the lexicon to develop over the course of history. And the guillotine is a fairly basic submission, and one that you can catch from a standing position or from an improperly executed takedown. So, it's a good place to start. In the quarterfinal round, televised on the pay-per-view, he faced a man who caught a guillotine submission of his own. A man the commentators tell us they know little about, since he is a ninja. And they aren't joking. But as soon as the fight begins, Pat Smith charges into him, and they clinch. And the ninja, a sizable individual, attempts to throw Smith to the mat and botches. The hip toss is defended and Smith winds up in mount, raining a rapid hellstorm of bones. Fists at first, and then elbows, more fists, more elbows, an absolutely unmitigated bludgeoning that ceases only when Smith, I guess, becomes convinced that he has concussed this poor fuck into oblivion enough to have won. By any reasonable standard, anyway. He screams in triumph, flexing and pacing around the fence. He has signaled in a primal way to every camera he can see that he is king of the cage. "What's up now?" one can easily read on his lips his cry of victory. But the referee, Big John McCarthy, is trying to get his attention. The fight is still on, he says. As this semi-conscious opponent falls about like a poorly manipulated marionette with tangled strings, staggering sideways and stumbling back down to the canvas. Blood spiderwebbed across his face like the tributaries of the Tigris and Euphrates. The fight's still on. Are you fucking kidding me? I'm certain that Campbell McLaren would have jizzed his pants in the production truck if Big John had instead said,
"Finish him."
Thankfully, before Smith stomps the man to death, Big John stops the fight, and I can't quite remember why. He had been imploring the corner to throw the towel, but they had stared directly into his eyes and thrown it away. Though the incident with Teyla To Lee and Gerard Gordo that had earned Joao Barreto the ire of Hoist Gracie had made him tentative to stop this fight, early. In the semifinals, Smith draws a striker who, up to this point, holds the honor of having the longest fight in the UFC. At just over 12 minutes. It was untelevised. He wins by standing guillotine choke, and his opponent submits by tapping the mat with his foot, as both hands are busy trying to free his neck from the jaws of death. It takes just over a minute, putting Pat Smith in prime position to challenge for the title of tournament champion, having finished 3 opponents in the span of 2 minutes and 35 seconds. That isn't even one whole round of boxing.
Gracie versus Pat Smith in the final fight. Smith stalking early with his hands low, trying to feel out
but
the
Smith doesn't even get one good
flinch.
shot on Hoist before they're grappling.
He leaps in with a kick,
A battle
and
that his balance quickly wins for him.
Hoist is pushing him against the fence now. Oh, he's turned him into the center of the cage, and a knee.
And with his hips set, drops atop Pat Smith like a dead weight.
Tried to reap the foot out. Smith tried to throw, but it was blocked.
The kickboxer
Hoist is in his half guard now.
puts up no defense against Gracie's positional advantage.
He passes to the mount.
He can't stop the mount.
Quickly. He's knuckling the ribs now, attempting to get free. For some serious striking.
Can't stop his arm from being trapped. Can't stop Hoist's strikes to his head.
He's got an arm trapped on one side. He's punching.
He taps quickly,
Oh, Smith is tapping.
completely helpless
referee-
under the
yes, the
glacial
towel is
gravity
thrown in.
of the Gracie
The
ground
fight is
game.
over now.
As it turns out, 4 months is not enough time to learn jiu-jitsu.
Smith taps to punches to the face from the mount position with one arm trapped. And Hoist is once again the tournament champion.
Next time, on the Cage of History.
The first UFC 1, 2, and 3, we had a 2-hour window for pay-per-view transmission. And when Hoist fought UFC 4, Dan Severn, the live event went for 2 hours and 3 minutes, which means that at 2 hours exactly the transmission was interrupted, and everybody who was at home all over the world who had paid the money to see the fight did not see the last 3 minutes of the event.
Growing Pains.